All right, thank you very much. I would like to call to order the Salem-Keizer Area Transportation Study, SKATS, Policy Committee for Tuesday, June 25th, 2024. And we will call roll. We'll go around the table here and then we'll get the folks on the screen. Desiree, can we start with you?
Desiree Collins, SKAT staff.
Mike Jaffe, SKAT staff.
Kim Sapinar, SKAT staff.
Steve Dobrinich, also SKAT staff.
Julie Hanson, City of Salem Public Works staff.
All right, and members,
Sadie Carney, Chariots board member.
Kathy Clark, Mayor of Keizer.
Morris, Polk County Commissioner.
Anna Henson, ODOT.
Okay, we'll bring in the two chairs. And then let's go to the other two members, Councilor Phillips,
Trevor Phillips, Salem City Councilor.
Mayor Horning,
Steve Horning, City of Turner.
and Director Maria Hinojos-Pressy.
Maria Hinojos-Pressy, Salem-Keizer School Board Director.
Okay, and then staff, we've got Brandon.
Brandon Williams, ODOT Area 3 Planner.
I think everybody else on the screen for staff is also here in the room. And guests, Councilor Cross.
Hi, everyone. Sarita Cross, Keizer City Councilor.
And Councilor Duran.
Hello, Kyle Duran, Keizer City Councilor.
Thank you. Anybody else that I'm not seeing on there? Be all on the screen? Okay. Well, thank you all very much on this beautiful sunny day. Let's start off with approval of the minutes from Policy Committee for May 28th. Were there any additions or corrections to note?
I'll move to approve.
Second. Moved by Commissioner Mordhorst, seconded by Anna Henson for approval as presented. Any discussion?
I just will note that it's talking about the OTC, sorry, not the OTC, but the Legislative Committee.
Joint
Committee, thank you. And SKATS and the COG did send a joint letter to the committee staff, asking that the committee consider having a Salem meeting as part of their floor. And we have not, as of yesterday, we haven't heard back.
Thank you. Yeah, I signed that letter on behalf of SKATS, and that was reflected in the minutes, or was it something that we were going to do? But that's not.
I just, just noticing that they were talking about it, so I thought,
mentioned it.
well, I'm thinking about it, mentioning it, yeah. Yeah.
That was it was something to be done, and so check that box. All in favor of approval, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, signify by saying no. There are no objection, motion passes unanimously. Public comment, this time is provided for members of the public to address the policy committee on anything that is not a public hearing, and I don't think we have any public hearings today. Anybody? I guess that leaves Councilor Carlson. All right, we will then go on to item D, which is the overview of the SKATS federal fiscal year 2732 MTIP development. Steve.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. There should go full screen now. Okay. So purpose of this agenda topic is discussion and more of a review of the MTIP process, since we're getting kind of the very early stages of developing our next Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. And it will cover federal fiscal years 2027 through 2032. So an outline of what we'll cover, we'll just kind of do an overview of what it is and some background on the MTIP. And I could spend more or less time on that depending on what folks want to hear. And I know a lot of this is familiar and we talk about it quite a bit. But since it's the beginning of a process, I thought just kind of talking about the whole thing all at once would be useful. I'm going to just talk a little bit about the framework that we go through here at SKATS and how we work with ODOT and other partners to develop the MTIP. And then a timeline, which is our current 2-year timeline that'll lead to adoption of the next MTIP in May of 2026. And I'll just note, I'm saying MTIP because that distinguishes it from the statewide transportation improvement program. If I just say TIP, that means the same thing. Usually refers to our SKATS TIP. So the MTIP is it's federally required planning document that MPOs are required to develop, and it's a listing of federally funded and regionally significant projects that are scheduled for implementation, usually over the coming 4 to 6 years. So they tend to vary in length. The purpose and kind of the basis of the MTIP is our long-range metropolitan transportation plan that Ray prepares and was adopted last year in May 2023. So that's sort of the vision and the goals in the long term, and then the MTIP is the implementation of that. And then it's required to be fiscally constrained, so we need to show that we have the funds available or reasonably available to implement the projects that are identified in MTIP. So this slide is just an overview of sort of the timing of the MTIP, how it's developed. The requirement is to do it every no less than 4 years, and to have your MTIP updated at least every 4 years. We're on a 3-year schedule because that's what ODOT and other MPOs use, and we want to be consistent statewide. So having the 3-year period for the updates means we always have an overlap year, and projects scheduled in the 4th year of an MTIP are carried forward and included in 2 different documents. SKATS also includes 2 illustrative years, and these are for informational purposes. The graphic here just shows, you know, our previous MTIP, which was 21 through 26. So that covered the years 21 through 24 as our required years, and then the lighter color on the graphic is the illustrative years. So the next line is the current MTIP that we're in the middle of right now. And then the last line is the one that we're starting to talk about and work on. So I wanted to show just where the overlap takes place and that projects are carried forward. So in this case, projects that are in 2027 year will be carried forward, and then projects that are in the illustrative years will be carried forward as well. Relationship to the statewide transportation improvement program is also important. So the STIP is developed and maintained by ODOT. It includes the MTIPs adopted by all the Oregon MPOs, as well as projects that are in the non-MPO areas. Once the MTIP, for example, SKATS approves our SKATS policy committee, this group approves our MTIP and it's signed by the governor, it's required to be included without modification in the STIP. So all these parts, all these metro area MTIPs plus the non-MPO projects in rural areas make up the greater STIP that serves Oregon at large. So now kind of shifting into how the MTIP is developed, and the way I'm breaking it down here is that there's 3 primary pathways. The first is where we spend the majority of our time as this group, which is projects that receive our SKATS discretionary funds. It's where the rest of my presentation will talk about. It's where mainly the next 2 years of applications review will focus. Also important to note, our projects receiving funds administered by ODOT. These are allocated at a categorical level by the Oregon Transportation Commission, and then there's various programs and processes for selecting projects. And then the third one is projects that use transit formula funding selected by Chariots. And that's because Chariots is the direct recipient of FTA funds for our region. Also noted is just, if jurisdictions receive a federal discretionary grant from USDOT, we're going to talk later about a Safe Streets for All grant. Those are included, and we typically just work directly with the staff at the jurisdiction receiving it to make sure it's reflected in the TIP document.
Any questions up to this point? Make sure everybody's on the same page. And I want to, before I go to Sadie, thank you. This was really well put together to really break it down and all the terminology, which can get very confusing with all of our acronyms. Thank you. Sadie.
Thank you, Chair Clark, and agreed, this is very helpful to have it laid out in a rudimentary fashion. I have a question on the illustrative years. So you mentioned that we need to have funding for the projects we add to the TIP, but they're not really added to the TIP, so we don't need to have funding available for them?
Yeah, so it's forecasted out. I mean, we're forecasting the funds available in all these years, but in those cases, yeah, we still need to, we wouldn't include projects in an illustrative year if we didn't have a reasonable idea that those funds will be available.
Okay, and when they're in the illustrative years, they're kind of automatically folded into the TIPs moving forward.
That's a good question. I don't know if we've in the past gone back and asked for like further application details or anything like that.
Yeah, it's a distinction between what the regulations say and what our practice, has been, as most MPOs are. So I think the regulations say only the first year or second year are guaranteed funds. Why they make the distinction not always clear, because I think it has to do with the allocations and appropriations, things like that. But everyone does a 4-year TIP, and then illustrative years are allowed. Your question of whether they're not automatically, we have to re-adopt those years. It's an opportunity for the committees to change their mind, move those projects, delete them if they wanted to. So those options are still available. It depends exactly where they fall. So if they were starting in year 4 and went to 5, 6, it might be a very good opportunity to change it or even delete it or postpone it even before any of it's obligated. So it's very conditional about where it is. The reason we like to put it in there, because it might be a project that got prioritized by the committees, but because of its cost or when it could get started, it was kind of pushed back. But it's a recognition that it was an important project to include, or try to include in our TIP. And so it may be included in the 4th year and then 5, 6, which are later phases of the project. Does that help?
Yeah.
Explain why we use that?
Yeah. And then why do some MPOs not use illustrative years?
I've noticed one practice is, instead of maybe defining and listing projects in illustrative years, they might list just illustrative projects and without as much detail. So I think there's probably different ways to do it. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the choice is basically so that we can make sure that we're planning a little bit further out than the 4-year timeline, and then for the purpose of finishing up projects, or like Mike said, projects that were previously thought we would get to in the 4 years, but because of funding constraints, wanted to keep on the list, but we're pushed a little further out.
And in my example, there are probably other examples where the initial phase might have been funded in year 2 or 3, but the next year funded in phase, in the 5th year, in the illustrative year, because sometimes there's design takes 2 years, or the right of way takes 2 years. So it's not always year 3, 4, 5. It might be 2, 4, 6.
Yeah.
So it's a way to keep track of what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm kind of interested in why somebody would not do it, because it says elect, and I don't know why somebody would choose not to.
You know, when I started doing the tip, I saw that as an option to have illustrative years and thought it was a good idea, and we've been doing that ever since, you know.
Oh, and I want to add one more thing too, is that by doing illustrative years, it keeps us from getting too far out over our skis. So we actually have to look at the project development and list in a more realistic lens by actually trying to look at it with a similar lens to the constrained years, knowing that isn't funding, but we have to be realistic rather than have a ginormous illustrative list from all of our different agencies, you know, the 2 counties and the cities, trying to pile them all into an illustrative list. So it's part of that projecting out a little farther, going, where are these going to fall? So we don't overpromise or overdream, but keep things in a more realistic, orderly fashion. But I appreciate the point also that things change. So as a project is going from concept in a TSP, Transportation System Plan, into a project, into construction, things can change. And you have those check-in points where you can make adjustments. Or we have had projects canceled by the jurisdiction that brought it forward, saying this no longer fits in our plan, this no longer fits in our vision. We have something different or better that we would like to do. And the jurisdiction has that flexibility then to make a change before they get locked in. And we don't want to promise a project that obligates federal funds and not deliver. That is not an okay option. So this buys us some thinking time and some planning time. I'm gonna go to Anna. You look like you were thinking.
No, I don't have anything to add.
Okay.
You guys are doing a good job.
Okay,
I'm absorbing.
all right.
I just have
Yes, follow up.
one more, and that is, so when we place a project or when we adopt it into these illustrative years, do they then revise their application to get into the TIP project list proper? I'm just thinking about that's a long period of time.
In the next cycle or, probably not. I think if I'm understanding the question, like going back to the original application, I don't think so. Because I mean, the applications are contingent on funding availability. So, and often, as we know, what's in the application that doesn't necessarily, year of project phase taking place doesn't necessarily, that's not what necessarily actually takes place.
Does that help? Any other questions before we go on to the next part? Okay.
Okay, so this is, a conceptual illustration of just the framework of how the TIPS developed. So at the bottom is really like our foundation. So things like our projects need to be consistent with our metropolitan transportation plan, local TSPs, the long-range transit plan that Chariots develops, and then our forthcoming metropolitan transportation safety action plan, as well as other corridor studies, other planning documents. I kind of focus on its main body here, broken into 3 parts. So starts with the project proposal process, and we have regional programs, which are things like our traffic signal control center that we fund at a regional level, transportation options programs, safe routes to school, and then the core of, I think, where we spend a lot of our time is this SKATS call for projects, where individual jurisdictions apply for either planning funds, but more typically capital improvement projects, and develop a proposal and an application that essentially identifies what the project is, some cost estimates, and then answers, I think, a pretty thorough amount of questions about what are the benefits and how is it going to achieve the performance measures that are identified in our long-range plan. So after that, in the vetting stage, first at the TAC level, there's a pre-application review, and that is sort of to group applications into high, medium, and low priority, just to give jurisdictions an idea of what might score well, and then determine, do they want to fill out a full application for all the projects or prioritize ones that they think will score better. Once the full application is submitted, there is a technical score, and then there's also a non-quantifiable score that are developed and then combined into a single score that helps prioritize the list of projects. During that process as well, we post all the application materials on our website, and I think we did a comment map for projects for the last MTIP cycle, so that the public can provide input sort of at that first application stage. And then the last stage here is the adoption. So that's where we release the document, the actual TIP as it's developed in draft form, have more opportunities for public comment, and then eventually have our public hearing and policy committee adoption. Up here in this corner is just the also incorporated section. These are some of the points mentioned on the previous slide, where we also incorporate the ODOT selected projects, the transit formula funded projects, and then projects receiving discretionary grant awards. And those happen largely outside of our SKATS vetting process for projects. So this slide, I'm going to actually just switch because this is really small, is our timeline. This is in the packet as well. But our timeline for developing this upcoming MTIP document. So we're here in June 2024. We're sort of having some initial discussions about development of the TIP. We'll continue some of those through the summer. We'll talk about revenue estimates. We'll talk about priority areas that we think are important for the upcoming TIP. October 1st, our plan is to release our notice of application availability, and then have the pre-applications due on November 22nd of this year. After we rank and talk about that at those pre-applications at the TAC level, full applications will be due at the end of February of next year. We'll do the first round of public input. We'll go through the scoring process and scoping of projects, adjustments to applications. That'll be the spring of 2025. Before next summer, the TAC will actually prioritize the projects and develop a recommended list of projects for funding that'll come before this group next summer, maybe fall, but I think more likely next summer.
Steve, I have a question.
Yeah.
On the scoping piece where you have April through May, typically ODOT's scoping these projects.
Yeah.
We're doing our scoping for the 2730 STIP August through December of this year.
Okay.
So I don't know if that impacts. It's not clear to me what we're scoping for on this. We're scoping all the projects, I guess, that are adding to. Okay.
Yeah, no.
Oh, do you want to answer?
Sure, because you were here last cycle, so I'll jump in. The last time we actually scoped one, which was the last cycle, even though we didn't add in those projects, we communicated with ODOT, and they asked us how many you want to scope, and we said, well, how many can you do? And I think we settled on maybe 6 or 7, something like that.
Okay.
So not every application needs scoping.
Okay.
And we decided which ones would do scoping, and I think we gave about 6 weeks. They asked for about 6 weeks to go through the applications and the cost estimates and note anything that they thought might need adjustment.
Well, it sounds like a separate effort.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm just concerned this isn't on our radar, but it's got to be on somebody's.
Yeah. What?
Well, last cycle we worked with Steve Leap, but I'm not I'm not working as the tip manager, so we'd have to figure out who in Region 2 we need to contact
Uh-huh.
this cycle.
Yawn.
Or Steve or someone else.
I can provide that.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. That's on my list of, reach
Okay.
out
Okay.
soon so that they have this on their radar. I don't want
Yeah,
to
I'll send you
surprise
his
anyone.
contact information. It's Steve Leap's replacement.
Thank you.
Yeah, he retired.
Yeah.
She'll retire?
We tried to bring him back and he said, no way. So.
That happens, yeah. I said something similar to the agency I work for.
Yeah, so the rest of the, getting into 2026, that's when we'll release the draft tip and the AQCD for public review and comment. And then our expectation is to adopt in May 2026 so that the new MTIP can be ready. Well, after we adopt it, it then gets forwarded to the governor for signature and approval by USDOT. Then it will be in effect October 1st of 2020. No, 2026.
Kevin? Here goes.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing. Any other questions or parts that anyone wants me to go back over on this or?
I just want to make
Discussion
one
points.
point. Where do these projects come from? Their origins come from, as I understand it, is from our individual jurisdictions' transportation plans. So if somebody has a scathingly brilliant idea and said, wouldn't it be cool if we built X? If it's not in the transportation system plan for that jurisdiction, they need to go back through that government. So if it's in the city of Keizer, it's a scathingly brilliant plan, it's got to come through us. We would have to, if it's not in our TSP, it would have to be amended and recommended by the city. So these are not individuals. These come from established transportation system plans, as I understand it. Is that correct? Ish.
I would say it's generally correct, but not precisely correct, because there have been projects that are maybe, first of all, they also should be consistent, either in our regional transportation plan, which we just adopted, or consistent with. So, and some of the local projects may or may not be in the TSP, depends on how long ago the TSP was adopted by the local jurisdictions. So they might have done a study and said, hey, this is a project we want to do, but it's not yet in their TSP. So we leave it to the locals to determine what projects to apply for. Very often they are added, they're a part of the TSP or added prior to applying or being approved by our TIP. So it's not a strict accordance, but in the application, it'll ask if it's part of the local TSP and indicate, yes, it is, or no, it's part of the plan. So.
So just as an example, we do a corridor study and our transportation system plan was adopted in 09. But we do a corridor study, we adopt the city council approves a plan, then we can go ahead because it is consistent with our land use planning and our TSP goals. That is something we could apply for. Is that what you're saying? Okay, thank you. I'm gonna go to can I go to Julie real quick and then come back to you, Sadie?
I just wanted to add that from a Salem perspective, an example would be pedestrian crossings. So our TSP transportation system plan does not lay out all 200, 300, 400 different crossing improvements we want to see happen. But we have applied for them because our transportation plan supports making those. For us, that's been an example of something where it's not specifically listed, but it is consistent. And we have submitted applications for those.
Thank you. That's a great clarification. Appreciate that. Sadie?
And then, so, for example, like say we had a major flood and an arterial washed out or something like that. That's not gonna be in anybody's transportation system plan, I don't think, because it would have been built a long time ago. And the transportation plans are looking forward to the next 20 years. And so something like that could be added just by like a month.
Yeah, that's not something the MPO usually has done. Because obviously it's very rare occurrence. We've had floods and we're just taking that. And it has happened a little bit. If that occurred, we would probably
We're calling.
have a discussion about that, you know, about if that's the appropriate way to do it, because sometimes the funding can't come fast enough. So you have to maybe find other resources. So
That might
that's a
be
special case, yeah.
like FEMA or something like that.
It could be a failed culvert too, not necessarily flood, but a failed culvert. Like, wasn't it in Maryland where that barge ran in and knocked the whole bridge over?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That was wild. I thought about their MPO.
We can go in, we can do the emergency response repair, and then we can go back and file for reimbursement. So we can keep traffic and things moving to meet safety needs for communities.
Okay.
And then just maybe one question about the schedule.
Mhm.
This comes to mind because I just sent out a notice earlier this week to applicants for a federal grant money that we are a part of the application process, and we require a pre-application conversation so that the applicants are submitting complete applications that are well thought out, that are more likely to be eligible for federal funding. Is there any opportunity for jurisdictions like that to interact with COG staff and say, hey, I need some help, or what are the different pieces? How do I fill this out?
Yeah, I think so. So for pre-application, that'd probably be during October and November before the pre-applications due. But I think that's part of what we're here for, and there'd also be time in the October TAC meeting to discuss the, you know, applications are available, and here's a little bit more information about what the programs are and what's eligible under the programs as well.
And you want to talk about July a little bit, give a little preview on
Sure.
that discussion?
Yeah, so I guess I'll share it.
Because that's related to your question.
I'll share my screen again. Well, actually, the next agenda item for today is we're going to talk a little bit about our funding shortfall policy and the idea of creating reserve buckets for cost escalations, potential cost escalations in the future. Next month, we're planning to talk about potential priority areas. General themes that we want to get input from the TAC and policy committee in terms of what are the topic areas, what are the priority areas we want to use our SKATS funding to accomplish. We're also going to talk more about our regional programs. There's 4 of them that receive funding through the SKATS discretionary sort of funding. And we want to talk a little bit more about whether those are going to go through the same full application process, if they'll go through an abbreviated application process. And then maybe not in July, but at some point we want to talk about general direction with those programs as well as they evolve and change, and we get updates on what the programs are implementing. And the last thing for next month, we'll be talking about updating on cost escalations. So essentially like what we're expecting in terms of the projects we have currently programmed, what we think in the next couple of years might potentially request additional funding, because we know there's a couple instances of projects that are going to or are likely to request additional funds. But also that list of projects is getting shorter and shorter, which is really good.
There's one more little wild card here, and you did mention it, and maybe I think actually, we're going to talk about that with the funding shortfall and reserve fund. We're talking about the federal transportation package will expire at the end of September 26th. And many of us who've been around for a little while know that we've had to live on continuing resolutions while Congress tries to figure stuff out. So that is always a possibility. And I say always a possibility because we've seen it many, many times that these programs just keep getting rolled forward until they figure out their stuff, and then they finally adopt a new transportation package or the federal package, and then roll forward from there. So that is also a question mark out there starting in the end of September, beginning of October of 26.
Oh,
Stay
yeah.
tuned.
Yeah, there's highway trust fund, how much money it has. There's continuing resolutions of the previous bill to keep going before they pass a new bill. So yeah,
It was years. I remember one of them went forward. I lost track how many years, but they went on continuing resolutions until they finally figured it out. But I don't know if it was between Ice-T and another one, but.
so our tip has to be very agile because we are forecasting revenues without having crystal balls of knowing, what's going to happen in Congress and federal highways.
Yeah, Congress is definitely a wild card in that conversation starting in 26.
How do we reconcile that with the TIP requirements first of funding for completion of the project?
I think, in the forecasting, we rely pretty heavily on historical trends, and apply the growth factor to, what the historical trends have been. But I think there just could be changes where, you might have more funding available than you projected, could have a little bit less. But it's, that's kind of the, I don't know if that's the right word, the art of a forecast is, trying to be as accurate as you can. Not necessarily over program the funds that you have available so that you do have some flexibility.
Okay. The sufficiency of funding for completion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
But they're the ones that aren't getting the work done to.
Got
it.
Yep, you got it. There you go. And there is the balancing act right there. Now, historically, going back on the historical trends, even with the unknowns, oftentimes when Congress is passing a new transportation package, they're looking at changes that are going to enhance the system, not roll backwards, because the members of Congress want to take something home. And it's not your bridge is falling down, doesn't get them reelected. I think we can keep a good eye on that, but that is, it's going to come up very quickly. Any other questions on the timeline at this point? Okay. So thank you very much, Steve. This is really helpful and great background information. Let's go on then to item E, which is the SKATS funding shortfall policy and reserve funds. Steve, you're back up.
Okay, so I have another slide deck. Yeah, I'll just skip to the outline. So we're going to cover an overview of our current shortfall policy, how we developed it, what the language is, and how it's been implemented over the last few years. We'll talk a little bit about the potential for shortfalls in the next MTIP that we're developing. We're going to then touch on the proposal to create reserve buckets for future cost escalations, and a little bit about some of the potential benefits of doing that. We talked about these topics with the TAC in the meeting a couple weeks ago in June. So we've got some feedback from that group to share, and then a couple questions for the policy committee to reflect on that were included in the memo in the packet. So our timeline for the funding shortfall policy. So back in June of 2022, when you all were going through this process for the current MTIP, for the 24 to 29 MTIP, there were a lot of cost increases, and there was a pretty substantial list of projects still at that point. So the policy committee directed staff to address funding shortfalls and decided not to fund new projects during that cycle. Later that year, the policy committee asked the technical advisory committee to develop a recommended policy for addressing ongoing shortfalls. So at the end of 2022, the TAC took up the discussion on the shortfall issue, talked about the need to ensure requests are fulfilled fairly between jurisdictions, and then talked about the need for project sponsors to really think about all options for requesting additional funds from SKATS for additional federal funds. So with that, in January 2023, the policy committee adopted this language by motion, which is to make completing projects in the TIP a priority over adding new projects to the TIP, commit to adding funds to projects as they are requested and delaying projects and or project phases if additional funds are needed, as long as project sponsors have shown they have considered reasonable cost reduction options and a commitment to timely project delivery before requesting additional funding. So that's the current adopted language that's in place and essentially directs what we do when projects project sponsors come back and say, hey, for X, Y, and Z reason, we need additional funding from SKATS.
Can you help me understand the and delaying?
Where's that?
The commit to adding funds to projects as they are requested and delaying projects and or project phases if additional funds are needed. That's like we add funds, but we.
I think that would be like if there wasn't sufficient funding for maybe like the construction phase, for example. So there'd be maybe the wording isn't totally clear there. I'd have to kind of read it and think
Yeah.
about it a little more, but
Maybe I can try it.
Go
So
ahead.
let's say, I'll just do an example. I'll pick on Julie, Salem project. So if Salem came in and said, we need $1 million more for this project that's already construction a year from now. They can, they can go through the process of requesting it, but they should consider both how they could modify that project or find some cost savings, or they could say, hey, we have another project in the pipeline. We can delay that project for some time being in order to free up the funds for the first project. So it's a way of allowing those funds to be moved from one project to another.
Oh.
That's one way how you might be delaying a project.
It's
For another example, an actual example was, I believe, Marion County and Delaney Bridge, which originally had a certain funding years, but then with all this cost escalation and their desire to fund some of their projects further in the pipeline that had already halfway through or more, they decided to delay the Delaney Bridge project so they can have use funds for projects like Hayesville. and-
Yeah.
Yeah.
maybe two separate
Yeah.
sentences could make that a little clearer.
Yeah, this was a committee, this is a policy by committee writing, so it got a bit longish.
Well, and I'll give another example too, because this came up during the conversation around the Verta Lane project in Keizer. So what we looked at in that project, and it's an ODOT project in partnership then with the Keizer, is we looked at, what would our construction timeline look like, and City of Keizer committed additional match to show that we were finding additional funds to make the request for more construction dollars. Delaying phases, looked at the different ways that project could be delivered, and we can't separate out some of the different portions of it. They have to be both at the same time. The biggest thing being stormwater. So looking at that project, the City of Keizer committed to adding funds. We committed to looking at the project scope and delivery, and we're able to work with ODOT on making sure that we got to fully funding that project so we can still go to construction because of the need for that community, especially around 2 Title I schools. So that's just another example.
That just seems like it could be clearer in the motion if we had two separate sentences to address the two, committing additional funds to projects as they're requested, or this other path, rather than trying to get it all into one.
Chair, but this motion, this is already passed.
Yeah, this is the
I'm
old
just,
one.
as we're reconsidering it, because I think that's, is it up for reconsideration? Not today, but.
Oh.
That's it.
Madam Chair, it may take
Commissioner
both.
Cameron,
Yeah, it may take both. That's why it's and or.
yeah, could take both. And I think, yeah, there is some wordsmithing we can probably do for clarity, and we can have that conversation as we look at, we could possibly amend to, for clarity's sake, but the objective, as we have discussed and understand it, is embedded in the sentence. So definitely would welcome opportunities to look at clarifying phraseology, if you will. That would make it easier for somebody coming into this cold to clearly understand it. So just want to put that out there. Okay, Steve.
Okay. Okay, next slide. So just to talk a little bit about the implementation of the shortfall policy. So that language from January 2023 was the first time a policy was adopted. But the practice of jurisdictions having the need for additional funds goes back a bit further. So we looked at the last 6 years, and we looked by year, and there was $19.6 million in SKATS funds added to projects during that time. So you see, like 2018, 2019, the funding levels that were 2.2 million, 3.1 million for a couple of years, and then really the largest project requests for additional funds and receipts were in 2022 and 2023. So that's sort of the history of that, going back a little bit further. So I'm going to shift now and just talk a little bit about the potential for future shortfalls. So, if we think about what's driving the shortfalls, so it's really the difference between the cost estimate that's entered into the MTIP and the actual cost when the project goes to bid. And it's kind of a fairly long period of time sometimes, especially, we're talking about a 27 to 32 MTIP, and we're going to ask jurisdictions to project what year and funding levels they'll need for those projects. And some of those are 2030, 2031, 2029. So it can be quite a few years between the estimation for entry into the TIP and then we actually go to bid. And we do use year of expenditure dollars. So we're calculating for changes over time, but there's changes that we can't necessarily predict. And sometimes there's project scope changes to a degree. So in this case, in the previous cycle, there was a low inflation period and then a very high inflation period. And that's what caused the difference in basically that backlog of projects as we have it. So because there were no new projects added during that previous cycle, we are currently, we have a much shorter queue of projects that are have received and might potentially request additional SKATS funding. So that's sort of a positive in terms of planning and projecting for the future for this next TIP cycle. And next month, I'll come back and share a little bit more detail about those projects and what we think might be requested. On the forecasting side, the way we develop the forecast is staff, we work with ODOT and other Oregon MPOs to just estimate essentially what the amount of surface transportation funding from the federal government is going to be available. So mentioned the historic data that we use from past years, anticipated growth, and then what we expect the annual limitation rate to be in the coming years as well. Chair Clark mentioned that, factors causing uncertainty. So one of them is going forward is federal fiscal year 26. So end of September 2026, that's when the current transportation bill expires. So that's a factor that causes some uncertainty when we make our forecasts. And then another one to point out is the federal limitation rate, which generally goes down during the life cycle of a transportation bill. It's just gone down more than expected in this current transportation bill. So instead of receiving like 93, 92% or low 90% of what's when the appropriation takes place from Congress yearly, it's actually been as low now to, I think, 86.88. Well,
Yeah, 86.85.
85. So that does impact the total amount of formula funds that we have available for projects.
And we have no way of predicting it in the future. It may stay around 86, 87, or it could drop lower, could go higher, of course, but we just don't know. Another variable we can't control.
We're supposed to be very accurate in our predictions using federal uncertainty as our foundation. And there you have it. Loads of fun.
Okay, so one of the ideas that we've come up with and discussed a bit with the TAC was at this point, staff is going to ask the policy committee to consider setting aside one or more reserve buckets that are specific for future cost escalations. And that would be developed as part of the upcoming MTIP. Essentially, a reserve bucket, it's an item line in the TIP and the STIP, and its intended use is determined at a later time. So it's a little higher level in its description. And then often the funds are, well, in this case, the purpose would be to potentially transfer them to other projects when they're needed. And the reason for doing that is you could have a reserve set aside that would be available if needed without impacting any other projects that reserve funding. So that would help us buffer against any postponing or deleting other projects that become programmed as part of this tip. So that's sort of one of the benefits. The other one is it could potentially serve as an upper limit of what we think right now is a reasonable amount of funding to make available for shortfalls. Sort of setting our base early in the process to say, we understand that projects have their initial estimates, they build in contingencies, but it's likely or potentially likely that projects will go over, and we think that we want to build in this amount of flexibility for that to take place, or to be able to cover that if it takes place. So we discussed this with the TAC at the last meeting, and there was general support for the idea of creating one or more reserve buckets dedicated to filling potential shortfalls. The TAC really touched on, we need to have better cost estimates. We need to, make sure that we minimize future overruns as much as possible. That's the source of where these overruns come from. So we need to continue to address that as we develop the MTIP. They suggested requiring project sponsors to complete an application form or some kind of memo detailing a bit more about why additional funds are needed, when they are requested. And then they came up with the idea of potentially using the reserve buckets as a cap on the funding available for project shortfalls. Okay, so I think this is my last slide and the questions for the group, but I can go back to previous slides as well. So the questions are, does the policy committee wish to create one or more reserve buckets to help fill future project shortfalls? And then we included our TAC recommendation, or staff and TAC recommendation, to include those in the upcoming MTIP with the amounts to be determined later. And then the second question is, does the policy committee wish to maintain the current funding shortfall policy that we have in place? And our recommendation there was to keep the policy and then continue to review this on either an annual basis or a regular basis as we get closer and closer to the next MTIP cycle. So I'll leave it on this slide for a minute, but I can go back and.
Yeah, go ahead and leave it up there if you would. Let's take these one at a time, if that's all right with you all. Let's look at the policy recommendation to create a reserve bucket, which is a financially, it's a great financial tool for helping us. So I just talked a little bit ago about using the illustrative years in our project planning. And Maria, I see your hand up, so I'll come right to you. As a way of setting realistic expectations of project timelines and delivery, to anticipate that we are still going to be dealing with possible shortfalls, I think is responsible. So definitely am very happy with having this conversation. Maria?
Thank you, Chair Clark. Yeah, I completely agree that I think that it would be a very fiscally prudent decision to create a reserve bucket to help fulfill future project shortfalls. I know you said that you wanted to take this one at a time, but I do hope that we could clean up our funding shortfall policy so that we can better tie in to these reserve buckets once they're established.
Good point. Thank you. Mayor Horning?
Thank you, Chair. As a banker, we like to have reserves when we do any of our projects. So I 100% back this kind of a thought process. It can be as relatively simple that if someone comes to a bank and says, we have this project, you build in a 10 or a 20% reserve just as a policy on something like that. And that can be determined at a later date. But in the banking world, the government borrowing is a little bit different than bank borrowing when you don't have recurring revenue sources some years. But I'm learning that you can kind of roll with the punches on that. But I'm 100% behind having a reserve bucket that you can backfill the project.
Okay. Thank you. Other comments here in the room? Commissioner Morthorst.
So the experience that we're having right now with projects in the county and with ODOT is the cost overruns that we're all experiencing, no matter whether it's labor or materials. Asphalt and steel's gone completely bozo. So I'd like to make a motion that we create the reserve buckets. As far as percentage to that, I think that's still built for future thought. But in my mind, I'm thinking 20% minimum, as we've had, when you have a project that sits on in our tip for 4 years and then comes up for bid, 4 years ago, it's really hard to project that cost. If we could have that reserve bucket in there once we get started, because of delays, we can make sure that we may not have to come back with more money. It would be there to finish it.
So the motion, as I understand it, I'll be waiting for a second, is to direct staff to come back with a reserve bucket policy, looking at a target of approximately 20%. I need a second to continue the conversation.
I'll second it.
Second by Mayor Horning. Okay, now we can continue the conversation. Yeah, I would like to go yes and. So, and then I see Commissioner Cameron unmuted.
Yeah, I see the staff recommendation is to develop the amounts later. And you just mentioned, somebody just said 20%.
It's in
Sounds
the
like a big-
motion.
And that would be good to amend that to determine later.
Is that what them, you want to amend to determine later?
Sure.
Okay, and the second was,
Steve.
Steve, are you okay with that, change to the, motion? Mayor Horning,
Oh, pardon me, I had a little curveball hit me here. What was the change?
the change was to delete the language about a 20% target and, direct staff to come back with amounts to be determined,
I can live with that in the banking world. Each bank sets its own policies, so whatever it looks like, if 20% may be a certain project, 10% may be another, so you could do that on a case-by-case basis. But if we're gonna require that, then you wanna have something in the back of your mind, so staff doesn't have to come to us and say, hey, we have this project, let's do 20, let's do 15, or something like that.
It wouldn't be project by project. It would be like how much we set aside in year 2, year 3, year 4. So it wouldn't be tied to the project. It'd be like, here's some funds in reserve in case any project feels has.
And it's one pot, we're thinking one pot of money for all projects.
That's the idea.
for the MTIP itself, for the package that's being put together for the MTIP, saying that we, based on prudent budgeting, believe that this would be an appropriate set aside in that bucket to ensure that the projects that we're trying to go ahead and deliver, we can get them all the way there and not have to come back with something else or find another source revenue stream. Is that how I understand it?
Yes, and just to kind of elaborate, at this stage, whenever a project is kind of being conceptually defined and the sponsoring jurisdiction is developing how much the design and right-of-way and construction costs, they're going to come up with cost, and built into those costs, or is it on top of that, are contingencies. And we'll probably have some discussions with the TAC members about what should those contingencies be, and what we used in the past is it's still good. So on a project basis, there's still contingencies developed as far as the total cost. This reserve is kind of the set aside for the rainy day, in case things get really expensive and way beyond what we were able to.
Something like, we didn't see the IIJA, ARPA inflationary rocket takeoff a few years ago. Nobody would have predicted that, for example. I'm going to go to Director Carney and then to Councilor Phillips.
Right. I'm just thinking I love the concept of reserve buckets. I think that's prudent. I'm trying to wrap my head around what that means we'll be able to add to the tip, because it sounds like another pretty significant line item looking at the shortfalls for 2018 to 2023. I was wondering, when you came up with those numbers, is that a list of projects that we could see where the cost overruns are happening? So when we're looking to adopt new projects to the tip, we can sort of be considerate of that. And then I don't really understand, it would be helpful for me to better understand how local governments are coming up with contingency and what that means as it relates to kind of the big picture.
Yes, so I just switched my screen. This might be hard to see, and this actually needs to be updated. This is a little bit dated document about as far as the question of specific projects receiving funds. So in October of last year, we did this breakdown by year and by project, which included jurisdiction and amendment number. And I guess we didn't include like what project phase the funds went to in this document, but we did. We do have that information available as well. This only shows, I said that the number was 19.6 million in funds that have been added. This doesn't include the end of 2023. So there was funding added to McGillcrest at that point. So this is a little bit out of date. but we do have that information on sort of what projects receive funds, additional funds.
Okay, Counselor Phillips?
Yeah, just to chime in, I think I'm supportive of the restated main motion right now. I think in terms of like the previous policy that we agreed on maybe a year or so ago, I think the spirit is totally good. I'm fine with like some minor wordsmithing to make it even better, and to tie it into this new concept of a reserve bucket. I don't see how we get away from having something like a reserve bucket. There's some things that seem to be in flux more than they have been 10 or 20 years ago. So yeah, I think I'm supportive of this. I think I really look forward to guidance from our staff in terms of like how big the bucket should be and kind of what that impact is moving forward. So the way that it's restated now, I think we've got that flexibility built in.
Thank you. Director Hinojosa-Pressey?
Thank you, Chair Clark. I have a question and then a comment. So whenever we have a project that is like in progress and it reaches those cost overruns and needs to have an additional influx of funding, what would happen if they can't access that additional funding? Because like I know that we have requirements on once we start a project that we have to complete it within a certain amount of time.
I think in those cases, either a project phase as part of that project would be delayed, or other projects could potentially be delayed if they're sometimes we know projects aren't on track to deliver in the year that they're programmed. So sometimes we can kind of work around that situation by delaying another project that's, maybe it's going to go into construction in 28 instead of 2027, and that can free up funds. So we're always looking at ways to shuffle schedules around if it works. But ultimately, if there's not funds available, I guess there's advanced construction as one option, one tool that we have to spend federal funds earlier than they would typically be available. So I guess that's our main tool, is the advanced construction option, or like I was saying, delaying other project phases.
We've been fortunate. We've had redistribution funds coming to SKATS. Now, there's no guarantee that we'll continue to see that, but as long as we keep obligating projects timely, ODOT will give us, according to our agreement, redistribution funds. But that we have to obligate things, and we don't know the amounts ahead of time. It all depends on what Federal Highway gives to Oregon, and then we get a small cut of that, like 1.5% of it, something like that.
And that's something that the state of Oregon, and kudos to ODOT and our partner jurisdictions, Oregon does really well at competing for and receiving those discretionary funds. Monies that other states leave on the table, Oregon is very happy to receive, and we get it. And I think it's really something that our policies and practices have led to that opportunity to receive those funds.
And the locals have to pitch in too. So for example, McGillcrest needed $4 million more for the 22nd Street. 22nd Street realignment. I always say 22nd or 23rd, but 22nd. And they came up $1 million extra, and then we came up with $3 million extra. The match is usually 10%. They came up with 25% of the funds.
And Keizer also overmatched for the additional funds for Verta Lane.
Yeah, so the practice has been asking the jurisdictions, what can you change? What can you bring to the table? And then what can we help you with if you can't bring all of it to the table? So that's what's working together.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
My comment was just, I was wondering if maybe in that policy for the reserves, if it could also include language around like what we won't let that reserve bucket go below. So that way we can make sure that, we don't just build up this reserve bucket and then it just all disappears within like the next year or something. And then also wondering if maybe there should be language around like how often one specific project can go back to it, because like I am concerned that with, having to move things around, that other projects would just continuously get pushed back and pushed back, especially for entities that can't do overmatches and things like that.
Yeah, I think there's some really good policy conversations about how these funds be managed. I think those are some really good points.
Yeah, this came up a couple of years ago before this inflationary period, and we try to set some guidelines, and I guess we couldn't get agreement about what that would be. So that was dropped as in place of, let's just complete projects and we will manage as we can. It's up to you how you want to go forward. Yeah.
So I was gonna go to Director Carney. Okay, and I'll
Yeah,
come to.
I know that I know this has been explained to me in the past, but what happens if we don't come up with the funding? There's already been a federal outlay, you have to repay the money, and is that the jurisdiction or COG or?
It happens so rarely that a project stops dead, and let's say it was all fully designed, and then the costs went up, by $100 million, and said, we can't afford this. So there is some, I'm sure, federal requirements repaying things that you have spent on design, maybe even right away, if you can't go and complete the project. But in our experience, we've managed through all these tools and techniques to complete projects, even if they have to get pushed back a couple of years.
Or reduce scope.
Yeah.
Reduce scope, yeah.
Or the locals coming up with more money, all sorts of things. So I can't think of a project where it stopped midway and we couldn't complete it and we had to reimburse the federal government. It is something we have to be aware of, though.
Yeah. And what would be the timeline, and who would hold the responsibility?
I don't know all the answers to that, honestly.
I know it's kind of like this looming specter. I was just hoping to understand it a little bit better.
Julie?
Sort of along those lines, I was just gonna say, I believe there's a 10-year clock from the, to complete a project, but it would be working with Federal Highway, and I believe it's on the jurisdiction. It's whoever entered into the agreement. And so, ultimately, if we can't figure out how to complete the project, including reducing scope, then that's on the jurisdiction to then pay back the money. The other thing, just to put out there as we're thinking about the, either an amount or a percentage, is, something that I came across the other day is that the Federal Construction Cost Index, I believe that's what it's called, between 2017 and 2023 increased by 80%. So, there's a reason that, all these projects are sort of going crazy, and it's hard to predict.
Yeah. And as Commissioner Moorhorse brought up, it's not just construction, it's also the labor, the design work and architectural engineering work. It's more expensive, so.
But I think the other point that was brought up was that because we didn't jump ahead with some of the projects, they're being scoped now in this new economic reality, which is going to get us back into more of a historically traditional frame range for the engineering estimates and the construction estimates. This looming gap, that 80%, and I'm still, my jaw, I'm picking it up off the floor with that one, but that's what we've experienced. This is going to be in the new reality. I think we're going to be able to do better going into the next M2. Lord willing, and other things don't happen. Please, let's not do that again. Anything else? So I think we've got a motion and a second on the table for staff to come back to us with a framework for a reserve bucket program. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, signify by saying no. I think I heard 8 ayes. Motion passes unanimously. Let's go to the second item.
Put an amendment in, and we haven't really talked about it in detail, but how that is developed may take not just 1 month.
What?
It may take a while, because it may be part of the whole application process, how much funds we are having. So, yes, it will be now something we will do, but I think we want to have a good discussion with the TAC about how to do it and what the right amount is. And then when we're ready to recommend something, then I bring it back to you. So don't expect it right away.
This be more parallel with the development of the MTIP.
I think so. I haven't worked out all the details. We wanted to first see if the concept was acceptable to the policy committee.
Thank you, Director Carney.
I was thinking about the reserve bucket that we just approved, and the contingency. I said this earlier, but, I was talking to Shofi at Chariots, prior to this meeting, and he said that projects have larger agencies identify a risk mitigation estimate, and then like maybe a 20% contingency. I'm looking for the right number here. And I don't know if that is something we provide guidance on or require in our project applications. And maybe that would be worth a conversation.
We definitely use contingencies in the cost estimates. Now, these are very preliminary cost estimates. You know, this is enough information to give the TAC and the public and the policy committee a sense of the costs of each phase. And that's why we do the scoping with ODOT, but it's still a bit of an estimate. And what we found, obviously, in big inflationary times, those estimates are not worth a lot if costs are going up by 80%.
Yeah, our scoping estimates typically have 40% contingency on them. And then as we move through the milestones of the project, like at DAP, which is the design acceptance phase, it drops. We're at halfway design, and we usually drop that to around 30% contingency, and then it continues to drop as we go through final plans. So I will tell you though that it isn't foolproof. Like, we've got projects that are bidding way over current rumble strip project. We've been out twice for it now, and it's a $5 million project, and one time it was $2 million over the low bid was $2 million over the programmed amount, and the second time it was $1 million over the programmed amount, and we reduced the scope by half.
Wow.
So it's been a big struggle.
And if I could just.
Yeah.
ODOT's got the good fortune that they can keep adjusting their estimates as the project goes down the pipeline, environmental work gets done, blah, blah, blah. We're not quite doing that. They're adjusting their estimates, but we're not adjusting our funding amounts along with that. So.
Well, we aren't either. We aren't either. I mean, we have the program STIP amount, say it's $5 million STIP amount, and we're at DAP, and our DAP estimate is saying we're at 6 million. Then at DAP, we're reducing scope to meet that STIP amount. I mean, that's really been the new mantra now with the climate we're in, with no extra funding getting around. Maybe that wasn't so much in the past, but it will be going forward. Like, that's what we're doing. We're checking what we have in the STIP, what the design is saying we're at, what the estimate is saying we're at, and then making adjustments if we're not under that number. Like, that's just reasonable. That's fiscal responsibility.
Well, it ends up creating a phasing, because the other part of that rumble strip program project still has to be done. It's just going to turn into a phase 2.
Yeah, it's gonna get delayed.
Yeah.
So those are safety projects, so that's a little bit of an issue. So yeah,
It's a big issue.
Yeah.
Let's look briefly. Steve, would you put the language up from our current policy? So the question is not the wordsmithing of right now, and ideas will be gratefully accepted, but to continue with this as the framework for our policy. I really appreciate Steve going back and looking at where this came from, that we were already doing this. So we had put into writing what this group was already doing, which historically, even before 2018, we were already doing. Sharing across our regions, sharing across our SKATS area, we were already looking at how do we make projects whole, because an incomplete project does nothing for us. And we've had this philosophy, let's get these done so they actually work for the people in our community. So that said, just on the concept level, are we good with going forward and asking staff to work with grammatical adjustments to help clarify? Does that sound like a good step forward? And if someone wants to be involved in the grammatical thoughts,
I appreciate any input. I think it's okay worded, but if there's something that you really think would be.
there's a parallel construction project problem in the second sentence, and it's been mentioned a couple of times. So we could either break it into two sentences or reconstruct that sentence in a way that we have a clearer parallel construction grammatically.
It's the and lane project and or project phases.
Well, that and, so I'm not gonna get into it. I edited way too many English papers, so I will leave it there as long as we're good going forward with asking staff to come back maybe with updated grammatical clarifications for our consideration. I'm gonna go to Councilor Phillips and then to Director Carney.
Thank you, Chair. I agree that this is the framework, and I appreciate anybody else who can tackle that second sentence. That is a marathon of a sentence. I don't see an easy solution at this time, but I'm sure that with time, something will be figured out. But this is a framework, and I think you've spoken to it, that this is what we're already doing. And I think that this does, begin to codify and capture what we're trying to do. So well said.
Thank you. Counselor, Director Carney.
Thank you, Chair Clark. And well said, Counselor Phillips. I agree with the spirit of this, and I do think that second sentence is a bear. And I'm wondering if it offers the kind of guidance that we want to project applicants who are coming back for funds with the words, they have considered reasonable cost reduction options and a commitment and to timely project delivery. And I don't know what reasonable looks like and who considers that and who decides. And I don't really know what commitment looks like.
Show me the money. Again, I think part of this has been around a policy as a framework for the conversation when jurisdictions do need to come back for being made whole. This goes through the TAC when you have the technical advisors from all the jurisdictions, including the applicant jurisdiction. So again, if this is the framework and we want to make this language clearer, then if we want to add some definition, but I think part of this will come in the previous item, which is that reserve bucket. We will have some definitions in there, and we'll be able to put some policy sideboards on that. On what does that look like? None of these jurisdictions, this is us, this is not them. This is us, all y'all, where we're coming back because we have to. We've looked at options. So we don't have jurisdictions within this group that says, you know what, I'm going to undercut my estimates so I can keep going back to the well. I've never heard of that from any jurisdiction in this room, and including the screen. But if we want to put that in writing, what we already do, so future people know this is what we are about and who we are about, I think it is time well spent to put a definition in, so that a legacy can be passed on.
And I think Director Hinojos Pressey's observation about how many times, is there any kind of a limitation on how many times a project would come back and request additional funding? Could be useful clarification. Yeah.
I think Steve looked at that a little bit, at how many times any projects have come back. Do you remember? I think I've seen one that came back 3 times, but sometimes the amounts were relatively small.
Yeah, I don't, I think that has taken place, and likely we're coming back for different phases of the project. So maybe part of the requesting process is defining whether or not this, whether the applicant, the project sponsor believes this funding request will be sufficient to complete the phase and or the remainder of the project. Because I think that knowledge would be really useful to know. You know, is this a funding request that's being made for right-of-way phase, and there's an expectation that we could see further cost increases later in the construction phase, or is this an instance where no, you know, we need funding for this right-of-way phase, but we believe that we have what we need for construction, or we'll find local other sources, local sources to complete the construction.
And you might have noticed on one of Steve's slide, maybe you can bring it up again, Steve, was the one about like a form, like toward the end.
Yep.
So the third one down, we could create something where we say, you know, jurisdiction X, you have a project shortfall. You want to get the policy committee to approve additional funds. They need information, background information about why you're requesting it, what you need. Staff could tell them if they've received, you know, received additional funds for the project, which Steve just said, if they anticipate any other funds. That kind of information, although it's time consuming for staff to put that together, if that's what you want that the jurisdiction to show you, that could be part of something that we require them to submit. I know there's some projects coming up soon that is going to need some more funds, so we could even start this, you know, during the next year, come up with those requirements. It's up to you.
I think we should be super careful about limiting projects on how many times they can come back. Because, and I don't know how we do that. I don't know how we figure out, like, I think if we pass a policy that says you can only come back 2 times, and it's a really important project to everyone, that's limiting that project. So I would be, I don't know what the right answer is, but I would be concerned about doing that.
It's true that let's say they only came back for, you know, 80,000 one time and 100,000
Yeah.
next time. But well, another project might come and says, we need 2.5 million. But they only can ask once. So I mean, in your mind, which is the
Thank you, Commissioner.
what's being more, you know, straightforward with the requests.
And the committee would vote on it, correct? Whether, so,
Right.
so we do have that discretion.
But if you saw the history, you can say, okay, you asked for money for design and you asked for $200,000 more, then you asked more for right of way because right of way costs are going up, and you asked for 400,000 more for right of way.
Yeah.
But now the construction phase is coming up and you need $1 million. And so.
Well, and I think to Anna's point, we work collaboratively.
Yeah.
So if this is a project that is important to us and we believe regionally that this is important, we'll have that conversation as a policy committee. Rather than having a rule that says we can't, we as a team can have the conversation. Is that?
Yeah, I think the McGilchrist project is a good example. Like Salem was lucky enough to get a raise grant for that project, and that is a much needed project. And if they come up short, should we just limit how much we can give them? I don't know that that's the right response or reaction. That's just my take on it. I mean, and Julie had her hand up. I don't know.
Yeah,
if she-
I was going to go Julie next.
I was just gonna say that along the lines of what Anna said earlier about how as you move forward in a project, you get more specificity, you get more detail. So similar to, I think, a number of the projects that have come back here asking for additional funds. Some of that, the decision has been made to wait until bids are even out. In order to actually know, rather than just guessing, we think we need another, you know, million, get the bids back if the jurisdiction's able to finagle that. So then you know, oh, we need 800,000 or we need 1.2 million. And so, yeah, I would agree that it would be better to allow for that incremental knowledge to be developed.
Thank you. I'm gonna go to Director Carney, then Commissioner Wardhorse.
Thank you, Chair Clark. So I'm looking at this language in the motion, and I'm thinking about kind of our long history of doing this prior to the motion. Can you remind us what the difference is if we have the motion in place or if we don't?
This motion right here on the screen, that motion, what if we don't have it in place? Well, this is a kind of a policy this group has agreed to, that you're going to try to complete projects. You have a commitment to completing projects, but you also have putting the responsibility also on the project sponsor to do what they can to do a reasonable amount of either delaying or coming up with their own funds or finding cost savings. So this is your message to yourselves and the project sponsors of what you want. Before that, we didn't have a strong policy, and these amendments would come in and we didn't have any way to gauge whether this is something that we've agreed to as a group. So I think this.
Just discuss them one at a time and.
Yeah, and they weren't as large as they have been over the last few years. I mean, in the past, when projects cost something a lot less, it seems the request for additional funds seemed very reasonable. You know, they'd ask for maybe $200,000 more, you know. But now it's the dollar amounts are in the millions. So, and far outstripping what we thought it would happen. So I think this policy was an important one. And I always thought we would probably evaluate it and see if it's working and modify it as necessary as we learn more and become more agile, see what works.
Yeah, sorry.
I think the Commissioner.
So I just wanted, a project we're working on now, road I was working on is 99 Cloud Corner. So that started clear back in 2010.
Oh my gosh.
When I came in 2019, it was $3.5 million project. And then they moved it up to $7 million and then 40% contingency. And then they moved it, it's gonna be done at $9 million. So that's 3 times. Had they not had the ability to come back several times, this would have never been built. So, but that's just the reality in today's world.
Right.
The last 3 to 4 years, nobody has those answers.
Yeah.
But the way that this is being looked at now, we need to finish the jobs because we can leave it like it is today because we have a huge delay and won't get done until next year. So it's kept some more cost overrides. And it's usable, but the only thing is we got half of the project done. So we need that flexibility, but I love Chair Clark. We have the ability and the teamwork with this staff to come back and discuss every project individually at any time. But just the commitment to get the current projects done before we fund the next one, I think it's just common sense. And I love that flexibility that we have built in and trust.
Yeah, I like the first sentence. It's the second one that I struggle with. And then it's kind of the implementation and what does it mean? Because Mike, I heard you talk about what it means to have it, but not what it means, what it meant not to have it. It was sounding to me in the discussion leading up to this, like we were already doing this. And so I'm not sure that, you know, and I know that this was you know, that we passed this motion in some very like turbulent financial times to address a need. And I think part of the need was reducing what y'all had to do, if I'm not mistaken. It was like a SKATS presentation to the policy committee on each individual project or something like, and maybe I'm misremembering. But I'm not hearing what we did before. Was that different than what we're doing with this motion in place?
We were still making adjustments, but what I was trying to say was that the adjustments have gotten bigger, obviously. And it got so big to the effect that we cut off any new projects for the last tip. And this policy reflects this. So yeah, there was kind of an inflection point. And all the years I've been here, it's the first time we've had a tip with no new projects in it. So, and what Julie was saying about the construction cost index, last time I looked at the curve, it's still pretty darn steep. That was 2017 to 2023, and the end of that curve was not flattening out. It was still kind of, in a 45-degree angle. So
Yeah.
I still, I hear things are better. And I expect these things kind of go in waves, but I don't think they're going to get radically better. We can hope so, and that's why this policy can be reviewed, as often as we want, maybe every year or whatever. So I think it still works for us, at least for the next year.
So I don't think we put a motion on the table, did we? That's right.
I don't think.
Okay, so,
There's a request to change the language, of course,
Yeah.
but
I got that.
request the language, to clean up the grammar. But to continue with this policy and to bring back a revised, grammatically clearer, policy statement.
Does that include the reserve fund language?
No, that's separate.
yes.
So that would be, if we can do that by consensus, does anybody disagree with that? I'm hearing no disagreement, so by consensus to ask staff to come back with some recommended language.
She did bring up a good point. I know, Director, Pressy mentioned it about the reserve fund and adding it. Did that not,
I
did you want
think-
to go through that, or?
I thought that's gonna be in the first part, what we just adopted by motion to develop that, and I think clean up this language, once we have the reserve bucket concept, then we can have that conversation about, do we want to embed that in some way in this policy? But I don't think it's wise to add a policy that is not yet written into a policy that we are currently
Okay.
using.
Thank you. Thank you for clarification.
Counselor Phillips?
Thank you, Chair Clark, and I agree. I think I had even mentioned it as well as Director Pressy, in terms of like this framework will have to acknowledge future work like the reserve buckets, but I don't know that it has to be spelled out in this section here. I think that it'll be built into what we do moving forward when it's available. But I don't know that unless staff disagrees, I guess that's my question is, does staff need that specificity? Because again, I really respect and defer to staff recommendation.
Yeah. I'm more comfortable keeping them separate. I just want to make sure I heard it right and not getting the full picture.
All right, let's keep them separate right now.
Yep, I agree, Chair Clark.
All right. Thank you for a great conversation, everybody. Let's move on then to the funding table update to the SKATS 24-25 UPWP, Mike. And for the record, Commissioner Cameron did have to sign off, but we are still well within quorum. Everybody else is still here. Thank you for hanging in there.
Share my screen. Okay, so this is item H, the funding table update to the 24-25 UPWP. And at the end of it, there's a resolution that staff is asking that you approve. So last month you did adopt the 24-25 UPWP. And a few days after that, ODOT informed us, and it wasn't a surprise because I'll get to it in a minute, but ODOT informed us about changes to the funding, mostly from the FTA 5303 funds, which are planning funds that come through FTA. And for the last few years, they've been very late in the year in providing the final funding amounts that's going for planning. So this happened last year where we had to also adjust our UPWP. So this came in, and all we need to do is to update the UPWP tables with the new funding information. And the information actually good. We're gonna get more funding as the result. So here's the dollar amounts. Primarily, it's that yellow row that says we're gonna get $17,965 and change in federal money. We have to match it with a little over 2,000. So in total, there's $20,021 and change in that bucket. Because of the way ODOT calculates how much all these buckets get distributed, there's a small change to the amount of planning funds that come from federal highway. That's in the first row. So we get $436 less, and we get $11 less in set aside funds. But overall, it's a positive amount that we're getting. So those are the raw numbers. And then I have to figure out where to change it in the tables, but the biggest one obviously is the 5303. So because transit is getting about the same amount for a number of years, I thought take that $20,020 and divide it between half going to transit for their planning work and half going to SKATS for its planning work. So that's reflected in this table. So those two rows in bold would be the new numbers in our UPWP, and this shows how much increase it was over the old numbers, 10,000 to each of us. And so staff is recommending that you approve those larger amounts going, to UPWP and being split between SKATS and the transit district. And then I will work out the detailed numbers that have to be put into the other tables, but I wanted to get approval of these larger numbers. And then if you allow me, I will break it down into the appropriate tasks that are required in the tables. So that's the request, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions on the recommendation?
I have one on the memo.
Yes.
What is
Carney.
PL?
It's the planning, it's the designation federal highway uses for these planning funds.
Okay. And did you consult with transit on this?
Yes, we did.
Maybe I'm going too soon, but I move that we approve resolution 24-16, updating the funding tables of the UPWP.
I second.
Moved and seconded to adopt resolution 24-16. Any further discussion? That was Steve.
That's Steve, okay.
Yeah. So moved by Councilor Phillips, seconded by Mayor Horning. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, signify by saying no. I think I heard from everybody. My motion passes unanimously, one absent. Commissioner Cameron. All right, thank you very much on that. Let's go to item H. No, I'm sorry, I just skipped ahead. G.
Yes.
Go to G.
This has to do with our safety plan that we're working on. So we put together a schedule for the remaining months. It's in the packet. The packet has the full schedule broken down by kind of milestones of meetings, the open house, etc. On the screen is a more abbreviated version of that schedule. And it talks about versions of the plan. So right now we're working with version 1. We put together version 1 and it's being reviewed by the project management team members. After they, we're going to meet with them beginning in July and tweak that version and send it out to the steering committee on July 15th. They'll have time to look at it. We're going to have some Zoom open houses. I forget the exact dates. I bet Kim knows them.
17th and 18th.
17th and 18th, where we'll have a Zoom meeting and people can join and ask questions and give comments about that version, version 2. Written comments are needed by the 22nd, and we're sending out emails about that for those of you who are actually on that committee. Then our planned open house is August 5th to the 14th, which is version 3 version. It keeps getting tweaked. And then after we get comments from the public, we're going to do a combined PMT and steering committee meeting, the groups to get together and in September and make some final changes, discuss the plan. That will be version 4, the final draft, final version of the plan. And then we'll come back to the policy committee in the 24th for consultant and staff to present that plan to you. So that's the schedule going forward.
Awesome. Any questions on the schedule?
And we'll let you know about the open house in So you can see the plan for yourself prior to the 24th, see it in August.
That was my other question, so thank you for that. And at the instant you have that date for the open house, please get it to us. Calendars fill up rapidly.
Yeah, the open house is online,
Oh, it's just online.
so it'll be open the whole period.
It's not in person.
No.
Oh, goody. Okay. Fantastic. Time, because I don't know about you, August is gonna be busy. All right, fantastic. Thank you so much. Let's go to item H, which is an amendment to the SKATS federal fiscal year 24-29 MTIP.
Okay, yeah, so, the city of Salem received a $2.8 million Safe Streets for All grant from the USDOT. And this proposed amendment is to add the project, to the current MTIP. There's, like I said, $2.8 million in the federal grant, $700,000 in city match funds, that are gonna be used for a Vision Zero plan, installing 20-mile-per-hour signs on residential streets, and then some other safety activities like acquiring speed radar equipment and a public education campaign. And then I believe there's some evaluation components to the program as well. So the request here is to add this as a new project to the MTIP, and it'll be several of the phases are programmed for this federal fiscal year, and then the construction phase would be for 2025.
Any questions on the project or the resolution? Okay, Counselor Phillips?
I have no questions. This is great news. Again, at the risk of going too soon, I would like to make a motion to adopt resolution 24-15, adding a new project, specifically Vision Zero planning and 20s planning implementation for Salem to the SKATS fiscal year 2024-2029 transportation improvement program tip.
Second.
Moved by Counselor Phillips, seconded by Commissioner Mordhorst to adopt resolution 24-15. Any further discussion?
Just briefly, like I said, this is good. I mean, I think it's also really timely. We still have absolute numbers of injuries and fatalities that are proportional to population centers substantially larger than our own. And I think that, our city council has worked to really pass some important policy changes. And it's just awesome to see that we're getting, funding for those things, because, you can't really do much without to pay for the work that is needed to actually build these things out. So this is great news, not just for Salem, but for the entire, region.
And congratulations on getting the grant. That takes effort on the part of council and staff to apply for these grants and be able to persist to receive them. Director Carney.
I was clapping.
Okay, yay, all right.
Yay.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Hi.
Any opposed, signify by saying no. Hearing no objection, motion passes unanimously with one absent. Okay, let's go to item I, which is the tip modifications.
Yeah, I'll keep this one really short. So in the packet, there's one modification that's been made. It was approved by this group last month. It was changes to the ODOT ADA career project. So I think we discussed it at pretty good length last month. So it's additional info there. And do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, except earlier in this week, ODOT had a map of all the ADA curb ramps being constructed, and that's out. To view it, it was good information. It's mostly in Salem. There's a couple projects in Keizer near the Chimo interchange, and then there's a whole bunch of projects in Independence and Newburgh that are on that map. So
Dallas should be
And
Dallas.
Dallas.
as
Dallas,
well.
okay, maybe I didn't
Yeah.
scroll over enough. So.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interactive map.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool.
Settlement ramps.
Okay. Good information to have and share with our jurisdictions.
Yes.
I did.
And then would you, in the minutes, would you put the link in? So we have it in the minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have that in for the record. All right, thank you very much. Let's go to informational items. Jay? Just for updates for everybody, we have the transportation planning update and the table. Mike?
The first one I already covered about the safety plan. The travel survey, it's been going on for quite a number of months to collect all those travel surveys. So it's going through June of this month. And then reports are going to be done later on. Then the last one is for Safe Route to School. Safe Route to School staff finished the bicycle safety classes at Morningside Elementary School. Again, they got assistance from, I think, the Bicycle Club for help. My crew are always looking for assistance when they do these bicycle. If they can do these bicycle classes again, it might be more of a call for help to get people to help unload the bicycles and all that stuff.
And there's also some very good news for Safe Routes to School. They got the grant.
Oh, yeah, okay.
That's huge.
We applied for a grant for a little under 150,000. So we'll be using those funds to help the cost of Safe Routes to School. It's great to get a grant, but the costs are a lot higher per year than that. So I'll be providing more information about that, but it's nice to get some extra money, but program needs a steady source of funds. Anyway, I was going to end up on this. The Safe Routes to School was for next year. My staff is already meeting with the principals about the program and how we could coordinate. And lastly, somewhat related, you want to show these maps?
Oh, yeah.
Kim has maps. Talk about the maps.
We have previously, Chariots produces the bike map, and so I'll get them out. We update them. Do you have one? One if you'd like. So we keep the information up to date, we update it, and we just did a revamp and a bit of a remodel of how the map looks, and Chariots printed them, and now they're available. So they're at some of the bike shops, they're with Travel Salem. They're with Chariots for any of Chariots outreach activities. They have them available, and
I'm gonna take a bunch.
hot off the press. So there's an online version. There's a QR code that you can scan, and you can have the PDF map pop up, and then there is an interactive online version with the information. So
Is that QR code?
It's on the back where your right hand is.
Yes.
Turn it over.
Oh, that's where it should be. Perfect.
Yeah. So this was a collaborative effort where I know grant staff, and the Transportation Options Program, and my staff worked with the local governments for verification of the information on the maps. And it has newer information than the one previous version. I can't remember all the changes, but subtle changes and not so subtle changes about the information for bicycling. Anyway, I don't know how many they had printed. Do you know?
about 2,500 willing to print more. They can do another print run of them. Well, I keep track of the data. So as things change or get updated, it's easy enough to plug in new set of data next year, probably run and do another print.
This is fantastic.
That's great.
Thank you. Wonderful. Appreciate that.
That's the update.
All right, the Oregon Transportation Commission will meet August 1st, October 10th, November 14th. I had the opportunity to join the chair of MWACT, Mayor Ken Woods, and Anna Henson, and our regional director,
Savannah Crawford.
thank you, I just blanked. I went Savannah, I couldn't get her last name in my head, at the last OTC meeting. So that went well. And also, we're really paying close attention with all the conversations that the OTC is having on the big projects from House Bill, the big transportation package in 2017, because it really impacts what we're going to be looking at going forward. Anything to add?
I don't think so. Yeah, thank you.
And then our next policy meeting will be on July 23rd. Our next TAC meeting will be on July 9th. Is OMPOC got a plan for August or September? I think we're still talking about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure we have a date yet.
Okay. All right, it's almost 2 o'clock. Anything else for the good of the order? Hearing none, the time is 1:56. We are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good that you always wait.